Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Shamunatira Vanachari. Shamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Shamunatira Vanachari. Shamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Shri Kodnatai Mai Prashashi ki, Shri Chalsanath Maharaj ki, Shri Giriraj ki, Shri Nismadev Bhagwan ki, Shri Prabhupada ki. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita. Chant Hare Krishna and fight. As Srila Prabhupada entered his beautiful quarters at Hare Krishna land, he remarked that no one could outdo Sarabi Swami. I think I haven't such a place to live anywhere in the world, he said. Los Angeles and New York are big cities, and London, Paris, but nobody can present such a luxurious royal palace. Seeing how the one large room was arranged to facilitate his different activities, Srila Prabhupada said, "This is like my room at the Radha Damodar temple. In one corner I am writing, in another corner I am sitting, in another corner I am taking prasadam." The comparison was odd, since the Radha Damodar place was a tiny cell, yet Srila Prabhupada saw them as related. The beginning in Vrindavan and the apex in Bombay. In either place, he was the same person, humbly taking a little prasadam, writing his books, and ambitiously planning for spreading Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada ki. Yeah. Today is, on the Vaishnava calendar, it's okay, I've got, well, yeah, you can give it to me. Today's the disappearance day of one of Lord Chaitanya's associates called Vakreshwara Pandit. He was one of Lord Chaitanya's main dancers in his Sankirtan party. What's that? All right, well, I've got it. Okay. Yes, Srila Vakreshwara Pandit Prabhu ki. Yeah. Today is also the anniversary of the disappearance of Indra Prabhu. So Indra Prabhu was instrumental in establishing the 24-hour kirtan in ISKCON Vrindavan, which was, he heard Srila Prabhupada express that desire. Srila Prabhupada desired that kirtan go on continuously 24 hours a day in Vrindavan and also in Mayapur. So one disciple of Srila Prabhupada, Indra Prabhu, he took that instruction seriously and he dedicated his life to ensuring that kirtan, Hare Krishna kirtan, went on continuously at the Krishna Balaram, ISKCON Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan. And that kirtan became so powerful that it attracted thousands of devotees and thousands of Indians to hear that kirtan, and it actually greatly increased the number of devotees who attended the programs at the Krishna Balaram temple. Indra Prabhu was also instrumental in helping young devotees take their vows seriously, and like really, he stressed not just, he didn't just stress kirtan, but he very much stressed that if you want to take part in bhajan and kirtan, then you need to chant 16 rounds of very offenseless japa. So he was very strict in his practices, and a great inspiration to a whole generation of kirtan leaders. So Sri Indra Prabhu ki. Yeah. And today is, in Jagannath Puri, today is a festival called Hera Panchami. So, I'm going to read a little bit from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which describes this pastime. As we heard 4 days ago, then the Rath Yatra festival, where there was a Gundicha Marjan festival where Lord Chaitanya went with his devotees to the Gundicha temple in Jagannath Puri to clean the temple in preparation for Lord Jagannath coming there. Lord Jagannath is Krishna, and in Jagannath Puri, the temple of Lord Jagannath is described as a Srimandir, and that temple is considered to be non-different from Dwarka, where Krishna resides with Lord Balaram and Rukmini, and he accepts worship in a mood of opulence. But it's described that once a year, Lord Jagannath Krishna desires to go to relish his pastimes in Vrindavan, and that the Gundicha temple is where he satisfies that desire. So Lord Jagannath leaves the Sri Mandir, the Dwarka temple, the big Jagannath Puri temple, and travels on his chariot with Balaram on another chariot and his sister Subhadra. And many different festivals take place along the road. And then he stays at the Gundicha temple. So after he's been there for 5 days, then it's described that the goddess of fortune, his wife, becomes upset because Lord Jagannath said didn't say he was going away for many days. He was just going out on an excursion. He didn't say he was going out for long. So the goddess of fortune, the consort of Lord Jagannath, she gathers together many of her servants, and she goes out to chastise Lord Jagannath for being away for so long. So reading here from Chaitanya Charitamrita. So when Lord Chaitanya was observing taking part in the Rath Yatra festival after he'd returned from his tour of South India, okay, well, let's start from here. So we're reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela, chapter 14, performance of the Vrindavan pastimes, and text 100. Tabe Vakrishware Prabhu Kahila Nachite, Vakrishwara Nachi Prabhu Lagila Gaite. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then ordered Vakrishwara Pandit to dance, and as he began to dance, the Lord began to sing. Then devotees like Swarup Damodar and other kirtan performers began to sing along with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Being inundated with ecstatic love, they lost all consideration of time and circumstance. After this, performing pastimes in the garden for some time, they all went to a lake called Narendra Sarovara, and there enjoyed sporting in the water. After sporting in the water, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu returned to the garden and accepted prasadam with the devotees. For 9 continuous days, His Lordship Sri Jagannath Dev stayed at the Gundicha temple. During this time, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also stayed there and performed the pastimes with his devotees that have already been described. The garden of his pastimes was very large and was named Jagannath Vallabha. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took his rest there for 9 days. Knowing that the Hera Panchami festival was drawing near, King Prataparudra attentively talked with Kashi Mishra. Tomorrow will be the function of Hera Panchami or Lakshmi Vijay. Hold this festival in a way that it has never been held before. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Hera Panchami festival takes place 5 days after the Rath Yatra festival. Lord Jagannath has left his wife, the goddess of fortune, and gone to Vrindavan, which is the Gundicha temple. Due to separation from the Lord, the goddess of fortune decides to come to see the Lord at Gundicha. The coming of the goddess of fortune to Gundicha is celebrated as Hera Panchami. The word Hera means to see and refers to the goddess of fortune going to see Lord Jagannath. The word Panchami means the fifth day and is used because this takes place on the fifth day of the moon. King Prataparudra said, "Hold this festival in such a gorgeous way that upon seeing it, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will be completely pleased and astonished. Take as many printed cloths, small bells, umbrellas, and chamras as there are in my storehouse and in the deity's storehouse. Collect all kinds of small and large flags and ringing bells. Then decorate the carrier and have various musical and dancing parties accompany it. In this way, decorate the carrier attractively. You should also double the quantity of prasadam. Make so much that it will even surpass the Rath Yatra festival. Arrange the festival in such a way that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu may freely go with all his devotees to visit the deity without difficulty." In the morning, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took his personal associates with him to see Lord Jagannath at Sundarachal. Sundarachal is the Gundicha temple. The temple of Jagannath at Jagannath Puri is called Nilachal, and the temple at Gundicha is called Sundarachal. Sundarachal means a beautiful hill. Then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his personal devotees returned to Nilachal with great eagerness to see the Hera Panchami festival. Kashi Mishra received Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with great respect, and taking the Lord and his associates to a very nice place, he had them seated. After taking his seat, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to hear about a particular mellow of devotional service. Therefore, mildly smiling, began to question Swarup Damodar. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, although Lord Jagannath enjoys his pastimes at Dwarkadam and naturally manifests sublime liberality there, still once a year he becomes unlimitedly eager to see Vrindavan. Pointing out the neighboring gardens, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, all these gardens exactly resemble Vrindavan. Therefore, Lord Jagannath is very eager to see them again. Externally, he gives the excuse that he wants to participate in the Rath Yatra festival, but actually he wants to leave Jagannath Puri to go to Sundarachal, the Gundicha temple, a replica of Vrindavan. The Lord enjoys his pastimes day and night in various flower gardens there. But why does he not take Lakshmi Devi, the goddess of fortune, with him? Swarup Damodar replied, my dear Lord, please hear the reason for this. Lakshmi Devi, the goddess of fortune, cannot be admitted to the pastimes of Vrindavan. In the pastimes of Vrindavan, the only assistants are the gopis. But for the gopis, no one can attract the mind of Krishna. The Lord said, using the car festival as an excuse, Krishna goes there with Subhadra and Baladev. All the pastimes with the gopis that take place in those gardens are very confidential ecstasies of Lord Krishna. No one knows them. Since there is no fault at all in Krishna's pastimes, why does the goddess of fortune become angry with them? Swarup Damodar replied, it is the nature of a girl afflicted by love to become immediately angry upon finding any neglect on the part of her lover. While Swarup Damodar and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were talking, the procession of the goddess of fortune came by. So, the pujaris at the temple, the goddess, Lord Jagannath has his pujaris, and then there's a small deity of the goddess of fortune, a golden deity. And then those pujaris, they put her on a palanquin and bring her out on this Hera Panchami day. She was riding upon a golden palanquin carried by 4 men and bedecked with a variety of jewels. The palanquin was also surrounded by people carrying umbrellas, chamara whisks, and flags, and it was preceded by musicians and dancing girls. The maidservants were carrying water pitchers, chamara whisks, and boxes for betel nuts. There were hundreds of maidservants, all attractively dressed and wearing valuable necklaces. In an angry mood, the goddess of fortune arrived at the main gate of the temple, accompanied by many members of her family, all of whom exhibited uncommon opulence. So this is the deity. When the procession arrived, the maidservants of the goddess of fortune began to arrest all the principal servants of Lord Jagannath. The maidservants bound the servants of Lord Jagannath, handcuffed them, and made them fall down at the lotus feet of the goddess of fortune. Indeed, they were arrested just like thieves who have all their riches taken away. Purport. When Lord Jagannath starts his car festival, he gives assurance to the goddess of fortune that he will return the next day. When he does not return, the goddess of fortune, after waiting 2 or 3 days, begins to feel that her husband has neglected her. She naturally becomes quite angry. Gorgeously decorating herself and her associates, she comes out of the temple and stands before the main gate. All the principal servants of Lord Jagannath are then arrested by her maidservants, brought before her and forced to fall down at her feet. When the servants fell down before the lotus feet of the goddess of fortune, they almost fell unconscious. They were chastised and made the butt of jokes and loose language. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates saw such impudence exhibited by the maidservants of the goddess of fortune, they covered their faces with their hands and began to smile. Swarup Damodar said, "There is no egoistic pride like this within the 3 worlds. At least I have never seen or heard of it. When a woman is neglected and disappointed, out of egoistic pride she gives up her ornaments and morosely sits down on the ground, marking lines on it with her nails." I've heard of this kind of pride in Satyabhama, Krishna's proudest queen. I have also heard of it in the gopis of Vrindavan, who are the reservoirs of all transcendental mellows. But in the case of the goddess of fortune, I see a different kind of pride. She manifests her own opulences and even goes with her soldiers to attack her husband. Purport. After seeing the impudence of the goddess of fortune, Swarup Damodar Goswami wanted to inform Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu about the super excellence of the gopis' loving affairs. He therefore said, "My Lord, I have never experienced anything like the behavior of the goddess of fortune. We sometimes see a beloved wife becoming proud of her position and then frustrated due to some neglect. She then gives up caring for her appearance, accepts dirty clothes, and morosely sits on the ground and draws lines with her nails. We have heard of such egoistic pride in Satyabhama and the gopis of Vrindavan, but what we see in the goddess of fortune here at Jagannath Puri is completely different. She becomes very angry with her husband and attacks him with her great opulence." Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Please tell me of the varieties of egoistic pride manifested in Vrindavan." Swarup Damodar replied, "The pride of the gopis is like a river flowing with hundreds of tributaries." So then Swarup Damodar spends quite a long time describing the ecstasy of the gopis in this mood of pride, which is a very elevated subject. So I will not speak of that here. But then Srila Prabhupada describes that Swarup Damodar is an incarnation of Lalita Devi, Srimati Radharani's personal associate. And also present in this assembly of Lord Chaitanya's associates is Srivas Thakur, who is, Lord Chaitanya says that Srivas Thakur is Narada Muni. So because Narada Muni spent a lot of time in Dwarka, then here Srivas now adopts the mood of Narada Muni and speaks on behalf of the goddess of fortune, whereas Swarup Damodar, he's speaking on behalf of Lalita Devi. So it's like a kind of an argument ensues now between Srivas Thakur and Swarup Damodar. So Srivas Thakur smiled.
Which number?
Sorry?
Which number text?
This is text. Okay, text. Let's see where she starts. Okay, text 201. Text 201. So we've just had Swarup Damodar speaking with Lord Chaitanya, and the conclusion of that conversation is Swarup Damodar says, in this way, Srimati Radharani is ornamented and decorated with various ecstatic symptoms which attract the mind of Sri Krishna. It is not at all possible to describe the unlimited pastimes of Sri Krishna, even though he himself describes them in his incarnation of Sahasravadan, the thousand-mouthed Sheshanaga. At this time, Srivas Thakur smiled and told Swarup Damodar, "My dear sir, please hear. Just see how opulent my goddess of fortune is. As far as Vrindavan's opulence is concerned, it consists of a few flowers and twigs, some minerals from the hills, a few peacock feathers, and the plants known as gunja. When Jagannath decided to see Vrindavan, he went there, and upon hearing this, the goddess of fortune experienced restlessness and jealousy. She wondered, why did Lord Jagannath give up so much opulence and go to Vrindavan? To make him a laughingstock, the goddess of fortune made arrangements for much decoration. And then the maidservants of the goddess for fortune said to the servants of Lord Jagannath, "Why did your Lord Jagannath abandon the great opulence of the goddess of fortune and for the sake of a few leaves, fruits and flowers go to see the flower garden of Srimati Radharani? Your master is so expert at everything, but why does he do such things? Now bring your master before the goddess of fortune." In this way, all the maidservants of the goddess of fortune arrested the servants of Jagannath, bound them around the waist, and brought them before the goddess of fortune. When all the maidservants brought Lord Jagannath's servants before the lotus feet of the goddess of fortune, the Lord's servants were fined and forced to submit. All the maidservants began to beat the Rath car with sticks, and they treated the servants of Lord Jagannath almost like thieves. Finally, all of Lord Jagannath's servants submitted to the goddess of fortune with folded hands, assuring her that they would bring Lord Jagannath before her the very next day. Being thus pacified, the goddess of fortune returned to her apartment. Just see, my goddess of fortune is beyond all description. Srivas Thakur continued to address Swarup Damodar. Your gopis are engaged in boiling milk and churning it into yogurt, but my mistress, the goddess of fortune, sits on a throne made of jewels and gems. Srivas Thakur, who was enjoying the mood of Narada Muni, thus made jokes. Hearing him, all the personal servants of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu began to smile. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then told Srivas Thakur, "My dear Srivas, your nature is exactly like that of Narada Muni. The Supreme Personality of Godhead's opulence is having a direct influence upon you. Swarup Damodar is a pure devotee of Vrindavan. He does not even know what opulence is, for he is simply absorbed in pure devotional service." Swarup Damodar then retorted, "My dear Srivas, please hear me with attention. You have forgotten the transcendental opulence of Vrindavan. The natural opulence of Vrindavan is just like an ocean. The opulence of Dwarka and Vaikuntha is not even to be compared to a drop. Sri Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, full of all opulences, and his complete opulences are exhibited only in Vrindavan Dham. Vrindavan Dham is made of transcendental touchstone. Its entire surface is the source of all valuable jewels, and the Chintamani stone is used to decorate the lotus feet of the maidservants of Vrindavan. Vrindavan is a natural forest of desire trees and creepers, and the inhabitants do not want anything but the fruits and flowers of those desire trees. In Vrindavan there are cows that fulfill all desires, Kamadhenus, and their number is unlimited. They graze from forest to forest and deliver only milk. The people want nothing else. In Vrindavan, the natural speech of the people sounds like music, and their natural motion resembles a dance. The water in Vrindavan is nectar, and the Brahmajyoti effulgence, which is full of transcendental bliss, is directly perceived there in its form. The gopis there are also goddesses of fortune, and they surpass the goddesses of fortune who abide in Vaikuntha. In Vrindavan, Lord Krishna is always playing his transcendental flute, which is his dear companion. The damsels of Vrindavan, the gopis, are super goddesses of fortune. The enjoyer of Vrindavan is the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. The trees there are all wish-fulfilling trees, and the land is made of transcendental touchstone. The water is all nectar, the talk is singing, the walking is dancing, and the constant companion of Krishna is his flute. The effulgence of transcendental bliss is experienced everywhere. Therefore, Vrindavan Dham is the only relishable abode. The anklets on the damsels of Rajabhumi are made of Chintamani stone. The trees are wish-fulfilling trees, and they produce flowers with which the gopis decorate themselves. There are also wish-fulfilling cows, Kamadhenus, which deliver unlimited quantities of milk. These cows constitute the wealth of Vrindavan. Thus, Vrindavan's opulence is blissfully exhibited. Srivas Thakur then began to dance in ecstatic love. He vibrated sounds by slapping his armpits with the palms of his hands, and he laughed very loudly. Thus, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu heard these discussions about the pure transcendental mellow of Srimati Radharani. Absorbed in transcendental ecstasy, the Lord began to dance. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki, Sri Hara Panchami Festival ki. So as well, one thing I really find very interesting and exciting about this pastime is that Maharaj Prataparudri, he greatly increased the number of people who were involved in celebrating this festival, and because Lord Chaitanya was present, he wanted to make this an offering for Lord Chaitanya's pleasure. And even though that festival had been going on for thousands of years, it's actually described that originally that festival just took place by the recitation of mantras by the different pujaris in the temple. But then at a certain stage, one of the previous Gajapati kings of Jagannath Puri, introduced the kind of external ritual in the form of the deity coming out and the arguments between so it made it be like a public performance. And here, then Maharaj Prataparudra, for the pleasure of Lord Jagannath, put on a really amazing show. So it's nice that when we're holding festivals for the pleasure of the deities, then we should always stick to the tradition and observe all of the correct mantras and the correct procedures, but we can do more for the Lord's pleasure. We can always do more. We should always want to increase it for the pleasure of the Lord and the pleasure of the devotees. I think it's really nice, by the way, Srila Prabhupada translates this verse from the Brahma Samhita. It's interesting that because Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, wrote a translation and commentary of the Brahma Samhita, then Srila Prabhupada didn't kind of present another book, although throughout his purports, most of the verses from the Brahma Samhita are quoted somewhere by Srila Prabhupada. So here he translates that verse, Sri Akanta Kanta Paramapurusha Kalpataravo, which is Brahma Samhita 556. The damsels of Vrindavan, the gopis, are super goddesses of fortune. So, they're more opulent. Their opulence is far, far in excess of the goddess of fortune in Dwarka. Because every speck of dust in Vrindavan is a Chintamani gem which is capable of fulfilling the desires of the devotees. So, and that's what brings greatest pleasure to Krishna. So there's no meaning of opulence. There's no meaning of opulence unless it brings pleasure to Krishna. Okay, that's okay. It's a very short verse in third verse. Jaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 14, Text 11. Kvachitaloka jihili swanavad ati parusha rabha satopam pratyaksham paroksham va ripurajakula nibatsi tenati vyatitakana mula ridaya. Please repeat. Kvachit, sometimes. Uluka, of the owl. Jili, and the cricket. Swanavat, exactly like intolerable sounds. Ati Parusha, extremely piercing. Rabasa, by perseverance. Atopam, agitation. Pratyaksham, directly. Paroksham, indirectly. Va, Ripu, of enemies. Rajakula, and of government officers. Nirbat Sitena, by chastisement. Ativyatita, very aggrieved. Karna Mula Hridaya, whose ear and heart. Translation. Sometimes the conditioned soul is very aggrieved by the chastisement of his enemies and government servants who use harsh words against him directly or indirectly. At that time his heart and ears become very saddened. Such chastisement may be compared to the sounds of owls and crickets. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are different types of enemies within this material world. The government chastises one due to not paying income taxes. Such criticism, direct or indirect, saddens one, and sometimes the conditioned soul tries to counteract that chastisement. Unfortunately, he cannot do anything. Om Jnanatirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Anshakapatarubhyascha Kapasundriyevicha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So when we're very distressed or disturbed by some atmospheric intrusion on our meditation or on our life, on our family situation, whether it's pneumatic drills, I kind of like, if you live near a main road, then they're always repairing the road all the time. And it usually happens on a sunny day because workmen like to work on sunny days. And like you often get, people are out in their garden trying to enjoy the peace, and like this pneumatic drills in these days. Yeah. And so much. So when we're disturbed by things which we have no control over, then we become so irritated. We become irritated because we know that it's futile. We haven't got the power to go and complain. No, we can't go and shout at the workmen and tell them. We know that it's going to go on. So therefore, we relieve our frustration by actually becoming disturbed with people, with our friends. We become irritated, and we start. When we become irritated, we start offending those who we have some affection for, even. And like this is like a very common situation in the material world, both today, obviously, in terms of domestic abuse and just so much violence in family and amongst friends. Most murders take place between friends and family members, especially between close family members. And it's due to an inability to accept our lack of control, because we're conditioned in society to embrace false ego, to embrace being the controller. And we're here, so we're reading here about, Maharaj Shukadev Goswami talking to Maharaj Parikshit about this. So it's not just a modern day problem. It's always there. It's the nature of the living entity to feel anger or feel frustration and not to be able to control environmental factors which are disturbing his peace of mind. But in Kali Yuga, and we don't know what previous Kali Yugas were like, but at least in this Kali Yuga, then the whole kind of consumer society is maintained by encouraging people to think that they've got some control over at least part of their environment, and that by working hard, making lots of money, becoming successful business people, then they'll be able to control their environment and have a peaceful life. So that sense of ego and independence and controllership, it's extremely strong. And therefore, when there's some external factors which are outside of the control of these people who pride themselves on being controllers, then they get extremely agitated and often cause harm to those persons that they actually have affection for. And once they go over that barrier, once they've crossed that bar of unacceptability, then lots of even more insidious suppressed desires come out, and they can engage in more and more heinous activities. Here, Srila Prabhupada is talking about income tax, so that's something that, people who become expert in business and administration, they think that they can avoid income tax, and either they do it legally or illegally. And by doing so, they see the government as an enemy. And this is like a whole culture that pervades the whole world actually now, seeing government as being the enemy. And so Srila Prabhupada, he actually did an amazing thing. He actually came to America in the 60s, where the majority of thinking people and independently minded people basically considered the governments of not just the Western world, but all governments as being corrupt and not having the interests of the people at heart. And so that was the culture. They had very, very little faith in government or public offices. And Srila Prabhupada didn't suggest that governments weren't corrupt, But Srila Prabhupada, he somehow or other managed to revive a respect for the system of government, for the necessity for government, and for the understanding that government is actually designed by Krishna and by Krishna's pure devotees, Lord Brahma, under the direction of the demigods, that there's government throughout the universe, and government is actually an expression of Krishna's compassion for the living entities. Srila Prabhupada said that we've all become no men. No men. We're like, no, we're not going to follow authority. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to create our own libertarian society. We've become no men. And Srila Prabhupada said, I've come to teach you how to become yes men. So like this is the last thing, that's the last thing any of us wanted to become. And who wanted to become a yes man? A yes man was considered to be like a zombie who just followed authority and didn't have any independent thinking. But a devotee of Krishna is defined as one who sees that Krishna is behind absolutely everything in the universe, and that we can't reject Krishna to go somewhere else. We've spent our whole lives rejecting different kinds of authority, and now we've come to the point of seeing that Krishna is like the kind-hearted person behind everything. So, so we've actually arrived in that environment of real peace. But because we still carry some of this rebellious no-man nature in our heart, because we've rejected so much authority throughout our existence for many births, perhaps. And then when we experience some aspect of Krishna conscious life which resembles in our mind a kind of authoritarian system, then we want to become a no-man again. And like the heart says, no, I'm just going to go, and I'm going to go and... But if we like associate with devotees sufficiently, chant sufficiently, read Srila Prabhupada's books sufficiently, we'll understand there isn't a place to go, because everywhere is part of Krishna's abode. Every living entity in the universe has an intimate relationship with Krishna. So whatever disturbance we experience is just due to impurities in our hearts. Someone get me a tissue here, please. Yeah. And as Srila Prabhupada says here, in the last sentence of this purport, such criticism of such chastisement from the government for not paying our taxes saddens one, and sometimes the conditioned soul tries to counteract that chastisement. Unfortunately, he cannot do anything. Srila Prabhupada says unfortunately, but actually I feel there's a little bit of sarcasm there. It's like, it's unfortunate that he can't do anything, because he's suffering so much because he hasn't, for a non-devotee, it's very unfortunate. Non-devotee, it's like the person is really up against the wall, and like either he has to go to prison or he has to remain a criminal, basically. So he's more fortunate if he goes to prison and gets chastised in prison, because if he remains a criminal, if he remains in the concept that he can outwit the government in some way, then he'll fuel that independence more and more, and he'll commit more and more sinful activity, which will result not just in more suffering in terms of karmic reaction, but will result in less and less inclination to accept Krishna. So I'll stop there. Any comments or questions online? Okay. How much, G?
I was just thinking that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu started the civil dispute movement, and this stands out important, with, particularly in relation to the last line. Such chastisement may be compared to the sounds of owls and crickets, which is translated as and described as unbearable sounds. So it's referring to maybe when there's a false authority, or an authority that maybe has a not such a pure motive, or there's like, for example, the Haridams that were happening even though the police were smashing their Madonnas and telling them not to. So yeah, this seemed like an important point.
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada said we should expose false leaders. I'm not saying we should. No, he doesn't say we should expose false leaders. He says false leaders should be exposed. But they're exposed by presenting the Shastra. It's not that we don't have to go on a mission to expose them. So that means that members of the Krishna Conscious Society should become very well versed in Shastra, so that we can understand what is the correct presentation of Krishna consciousness. And then in that sense, false leaders, or not necessarily false leaders, but false mentalities, even our own false mentality, can be rectified, can be steered back online without some kind of major upheaval of the society. So yes, it's our responsibility as followers to become very well versed in the Shastra, so that we're not susceptible to improper teaching. So thanks very much for the comments. Bhagavatam Prabhu.
Just add a little bit to this comment. So when we speak about protest or like exposing, which is very nicely explained, really exposing is actually presenting what a true leader should be. And also, so we're not against the principal authority in itself, but we're against improper leadership. Leadership has to be there. It has to be with a purified heart, establishing that leader has to be a Rajarshi. Obviously we have a lot of work to be done ourselves as well, to be that. But the comment that I wanted to make is that leadership is required, and also leaders may make some mistakes. Actually, I was listening, Gauranga Prabhu was explaining this principle, that Yudhishthir Maharaj was a complete saint. He was a Dharmaraj, or a son of Dharmaraj. So religious principles perfectly, but he made some mistakes. He actually made a few mistakes. One mistake he made that, was that in any circumstance, whatever my seniors will say, I'm just gonna do it blindly. That was one of his mistakes, actually, because when the seniors called him for a gambling match, which he should have rejected it because it was very clear he's gonna get cheated, but he accepted because he took that vow. Whatever my seniors say, I'm just gonna do it blindly. And therefore he lost his kingdom, and etc. So the blind following shouldn't be there. We should know Shastra, as you say, and etc. Should be able to understand what is right thing and not right thing. So we shouldn't be a blind followers. But at the same time, we should be followers at the same time. But we shouldn't be blind followers. And also, if the leader makes mistakes, as we can see in that circumstances, none of his brothers has rejected him for those mistakes. They still supported him despite of the mistakes. And in Kali Yuga, as soon as there is a mistake, there is a rejection, writing a person off, etc., etc. And in our movement as well, it happens. But it's not a dharmic thing to do. It's giving a space for making. Lord Brahma made mistakes. Like leaders, you can see through how the Srimad Bhagavatam made many mistakes. But still the principle of leadership remains, and giving a support to leader remains, not writing them off, immediately giving a chance. Prabhupada's disciples made many mistakes. They were reinstated. As long as something is, some things are not acceptable, but it has to be quite serious, deviation.
No, I think it was you made that incorrect. You said in our movement it happens that people are written off because they make a mistake. But it doesn't happen in our movement. It happens outside of our movement. Because our movement is the movement of Krishna consciousness is the way that it's going forward in the proper way. So if we see something within, like, going on which is outside of the correct understanding, that's not in our movement. So we don't need to make that statement that something happens in our movement. Because like in the highest in the GBC, they're before they make a decision to which will influence the life of a devotee, there's so much discussion goes on from all different angles, just like what we're discussing now. So it may happen within what people perceive as being, it may be what people perceive as the Hare Krishna movement, but that's not actually the Hare Krishna movement.
Yeah, that's true. It will be difficult to explain this principle if I say, it's an our movement, it is actually not our movement, but it's a good point. Yes, so that's not exactly a Krishna consciousness movement, is more.
But anyway, we won't get into this. You already explained the principle. But yeah, externally it may seem that there is some mistakes, and probably there was some mistakes. It's not, you cannot say that there was no mistakes made in our movement over the last 50 years. But the intention, to please Guru and Krishna Srila Prabhupada remains. But anyway, the point is that we shouldn't write people off or write leadership off, because it does happen, for neophyte followers. You could say it's not our movement. Those people who think like that, but they seem to be, a good number. So we shouldn't be on that camp. We should be, as Javat Vasi explained, in the true Krishna consciousness movement, which means we are supporting the leaders, we are forgiving, giving another chance, giving support.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's something which movement means things are moving at different times. The intention is there, the same intention. So someone can come up with a question which may seem to put some doubt, but we by really listening to the question, understanding the question, and try to answer it from all different angles of vision, then we can understand that we have the same intention. And so thank you very much, Prabhu. Kancha Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaur Premanandi. Iskon Gurvinda ki, Jai Ananta